Welcome to the Leadership Communication Expo, the virtual event that is giving you access to industry leaders who are sharing their simple, actionable, step-by-step strategies so you can fully embrace the leader you are meant to be, master conflict management, and create engaging and inclusive teams. My name is Tammy Dunnett, your host, and today with me I have Izabela Lusinska. She is an executive and leadership coach and a global workplace expert with over 15 years of experience in assisting and training leaders and teams of globally operating companies. She currently works with executives at top talent at Amazon, Coca-Cola, Clifford Chance, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and Fujitsu, just to name a few. Izabela is the founder of New Global Elite, a training and coaching company specializing in developing leaders and skills for the 21st century business. An avid advocate for women leadership, she firmly believes that women are ideally suited to lead our world into a better future. Izabela is an associate certified coach through the International Coach Federation and an active member of the Institute of Coaching, an affiliate of the Harvard Medical School. She holds 6 certifications in leadership, communications, and negotiations from the Harvard University and Harvard Law School. And today we are going to be talking about outsmarting imposter syndrome, how to unlock your limitless success. Welcome, Izabela.
Thank you so much, Tammy, for this introduction and for inviting me to speak at your expo. I am really honored to be here and to share my know-how about this very important topic that affects about 30% of high achievers globally. So hopefully your audience is going to learn some really important and useful tips and strategies how to deal with this problem.
Oh, I have no doubt that they will definitely learn something from you today. And I was thinking earlier today, so it's funny because I think we often use the terms imposter syndrome when we're struggling, but I don't know if I'm always in the imposter syndrome, or if I'm just really coming up against something that's difficult and hard and challenging for me, and I'm kind of not moving forward. I thought we could start there maybe and talk about what it actually is.
Yes. So there is a really big difference and also huge overlap between the imposter syndrome and just healthy self-doubt, right? So there is a difference and there is an overlap. And so that's why maybe this is so confusing for many people. But imposter syndrome is a syndrome. This is a psychological issue that can be chronic and it can be really paralyzing. And so this is the difference, for example, to just healthy self-doubt. This will pass, right? So let's say you go into a new role, you get a new task, maybe you have a new position. Of course, it is healthy to have some self-doubt, right? There's some uncertainty that is natural, of course, because you are stepping into something new. So you've never done it before, you've never achieved anything in this area yet, right? You're going a step higher. Of course, it is healthy to have some self-doubt and uncertainty, but imposter syndrome is different. So let's maybe start with the definition. And I have a definition here in front of me so that we all understand. And so imposter syndrome is a psychological pattern in which an individual doubts their skills, talents, or accomplishments and has a persistent internalized fear of being exposed as a fraud. Despite external evidence of their competence, those experiencing the phenomenon remain convinced that they are frauds and do not deserve all they have achieved. So do you see the difference between, just being up against a challenge and having imposter syndrome?
Yeah, I definitely can see the difference. I'm wondering how people, in thinking of imposter syndrome, because I know I've used those terms before, and in hearing that definition, I'm like, well, maybe it hasn't been imposter syndrome, but it becomes almost so common language in the workplace among leaders, like, oh, I feel like I'm such an imposter, like I'm going to get found out. And so the languaging around it seems to fit their feelings of discomfort, but maybe not fit the actual definition.
Yes. So, maybe it's a little bit lazy to put the label of imposter syndrome on everything. And speaking of leaders, Tammy, this is a very important point. Because leadership, by definition, is challenging, right? When you are a leader, you find yourself in situations very often where nobody has been before you. So obviously, you will feel like you have no idea. There is no script, there is no map. It hasn't been charted yet. That's why you are the leader. And again, some leaders will have that healthy dose of self-doubt, which is really good, because what we really don't want to see in leaders is this overconfidence, this bravado, right? But then some of the leaders, because they are high achievers, so imposter syndrome affects about 30% people in that group. That's pretty high.
Mm-hmm.
So we can assume that they speak about the genuine imposter syndrome, that they really feel that they don't belong. And so this is very sad, obviously, because the imposter syndrome, the paradox here is that it affects mostly people who are high achieving. So these are the people who will go high up, who will have those high positions, but they will be convinced that they got there because there was a mistake. They got there because of a relationship with somebody, right? Maybe they had a mentor who recommended them, and they feel internally that they didn't really deserve it, but because somebody put in a good word for them, they got that position, right? So they will question, oh, did I really deserve it? Or maybe I shouldn't be here. Maybe I'm not that smart. Maybe I'm not qualified yet. Maybe I'm not in that place yet, but they put me here, and they will find out that they made a mistake, right? So those feelings, those thoughts, they drive a very unhealthy self-doubt that in the worst case can lead to paralysis. Or, one of the coping mechanisms for imposter syndrome is overworking, right? So it can lead to burnout. It can lead to burnout. And that's why this is really unhealthy. And that's why so many leaders also have it.
Yeah. And so when you were sharing all that, I was thinking about high achievers naturally probably feel like they can be in advanced positions. Like that's just their goal, that's their ambition, they're going to get there. And then when they actually get there, maybe it's a realization that they didn't know what they were stepping into. I don't know. I'm just kind of speculating, being a high achiever myself. Not always knowing what I'm stepping into. And then you kind of get there like, whoa, I guess I didn't really prepare for this. And I can see that self-doubt maybe starting at self-doubt and turning into a true imposter syndrome.
Very good point. So imposter syndrome can be triggered by many things. And one of them is stepping into a higher role, a stretching role, for example, without having a good support system. Yeah. And this can be a trigger, because if you are really capable, if you are smart, and you know that you are, you have the skills, you have ambition, you push yourself, you get that stretch assignment, you get there and you look around and you're like, whew, maybe it's a little bit too high for me right now, right? The air is rare here, but you adjust because there's support, there are mentors, maybe somebody can give you advice, you have a support network. Maybe you're very good at getting information from your team. So you pull all those resources together, and then step by step, you occupy that role, right? You own it. But the problem, of course, is that if there isn't enough support, if there aren't enough resources, and you have stretched yourself too far, then you will have problems coping. You will hit the walls, and you will feel the pain of it. And then the self-doubt that is not healthy is going to kick in. So this is one of those possibilities where the imposter syndrome can be activated. And this is also a very important thing to add, that nobody is born with imposter syndrome. We are not born with it. Nobody, right? So imposter syndrome is acquired. We acquire it, or we are put in situations where we develop it. Right? And this stretch assignments where there isn't enough support, that's one of them.
That sounds like, for organizations, a way to mitigate the negative effects of imposter syndrome, the financial costs related to imposter syndrome, would be to make sure that there is a good mentorship program for people moving into that stretch position for the very first time.
Yes. So this is a very, very good mitigation strategy. That if you promote people, especially young people or people from minorities, right? And I would like to come back to this in a minute, but if you promote people like this, yes, give them support. Be prepared that they will have those moments of self-doubt that are healthy and natural. Give them a place where they can come with them. And create psychological safety in which they will not feel ashamed for asking for help and advice. Because this is another thing that plagues people with imposter syndrome. That imposter syndrome mostly happens in isolation because people are ashamed of it, right? They are ashamed of this feeling I'm not good enough. I'm not ready yet. This is not where I should be. This was a mistake. They just put me here because, I don't know, they liked me, or there was nobody else, right? Nobody better. And so I landed this position. But they're so ashamed of this that they don't speak about it, not to their mentors, not to anybody else.
Well, and that
So,
sounds like an ego-driven response, right? Being a high achiever, you measure your success by your outcomes, by what you produce, how well you get along with people, all those things, the number of initials behind your name or whatever that is, there's some sort of external validation. And that when you step into these roles and that's not there, it potentially erodes away your own belief of self. This is what I'm picking up on.
yeah, and this is also true. But the thing is that as high achievers, there's the healthy ambition and there's this imposter syndrome, unhealthy ambition. So people who suffer from imposter syndrome, they all have unhealthy ambition and unhealthy standards. They hold themselves to standards that are so stratospherically high that nobody can fulfill them.
Okay. That's an important difference, I think, to share here for sure.
Right. So I just want to stress this again. So people who suffer from imposter syndrome will have standards and will set bar for themselves so high that they will have to work really hard to get there, really hard. And this is their internal standard. So nobody put it on them, right? This is not organization, for example. And so there are, for example, different types. This is also interesting, different types of imposter syndrome. And in my gift to your audience, there will be a little bonus there. So people will be able to identify themselves as a certain type. There are 5 types. They were developed by Dr. Veronica Young. And one of those types is, for example, the expert. So speaking of the bar being really high, an expert will only be satisfied with themselves when they know all the answers to everything in their field, that they know everything that there is to be known in their field. Is it a realistic standard? Yeah. So is it a realistic standard, Tammy?
No, absolutely not.
No. But so this is activated by the imposter syndrome. They feel that because they don't know all the answers, they can never be satisfied with themselves.
That's a hard driving person. Wow. I just feel the energy and the heaviness of that goal, on that person to feel like they need to have all the answers.
Yeah. But so this is one of those types of imposter syndrome, and there are 4 more. So people will be able to look at them and identify which one they have.
Okay. Now you wanted to come back to, you talked about promoting and advancing minorities. I think that's what you wanted to come back to.
Yes, because certain groups of people are more prone to develop the imposter syndrome, and the people from minority groups will suffer more often from imposter syndrome. And this is something that leaders also need to understand and bear in mind. So you and I, we're both women, and still, even today, 21st century, there aren't enough women in leadership positions. And you know that I am a very strong advocate for women leadership. So let's take a look at this. When you have an environment that is mostly male, because the higher you go, the more male and more white the environment will become. So women, or women of color especially, are going to have that feeling, I don't belong here. So it is not only individual, and I really want to stress this very, very strongly here, that it is very often that organizations will push the responsibility for the imposter syndrome and everything that comes with it, all the negative things that come with it, to the individual. They will say, okay, this is an individual problem, and the solutions lay with the individual. It is not our issue. But I'm sorry, I'm not going to let the organizations off the hook here, because this is organizational issue. So if you create an environment in which minorities are not supported, in which minorities feel like, somebody did them a favor by giving them this position because they're a woman of color, for example. And so the company needed a token woman of color in this position, right? So if you do not give them fair opportunities, if you do not support them, if you do not promote them, So they naturally have more people like them so that they can compare themselves to and get support from and get wisdom from. You will create an environment in which people will develop imposter syndrome. Because clearly, imagine yourself, if you are in this kind of position and there's nobody like you, then one of the imposter syndrome symptoms is feeling alienated, feeling that you do not belong, that you are out of place. So even if you're physically out of place because you're the only one, is going to trigger, or it might trigger, there's very high potential for this imposter syndrome being triggered. So I would like to encourage, yeah?
No, go ahead.
So I just wanted to encourage leaders and organizations in general that they take stock of how they treat minorities. What is the culture? Is it the culture of psychological safety? Is it the culture of diversity? Is it truly the culture of diversity? Or do you have just token people?
Mm-hmm.
I was just going to share service.
I was just going to share that we know ourselves through our interactions with others. That's the foundation of self-concept. And when you highlighted that lack of others who look like us and, we can role model and learn from, then I can see that being a significant role in how we see self, which leads to potentially this really career-changing syndrome, imposter syndrome.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And when you add to it some working environments, Tammy, which systematically are discriminating, for example, with micro aggressions, as a woman, I've experienced that. I'm sure you have as well. When you add that layer where there are comments that are tolerated, that they happen in the open, they happen in meetings, about you or about your group, your minority group, about your race, age, sex, whatever, the way you look, I don't know, you are going to feel very insecure. And you're going to feel not welcome. And you're going to feel that you do not belong. And you're going to question, what are you doing there in the first place? Whether you should even be there. All of these thoughts, and thoughts are very important in the imposter syndrome because they trigger it and they fuel it. So all these thoughts are going to pop up in your head. And if this happens regularly, you're a bullying expert, so you know that. If it happens over time, then it kind of becomes part of your identity. And there are all kinds of coping mechanisms, but none of this is healthy. So organizations and leaders have a really big responsibility here in creating psychologically safe workspaces that are truly diverse so that they support these minority groups and not push them into those feelings of self-doubt and questioning whether they belong or not, and whether they belong fairly, whether they've earned their place at the table, or whether somebody did them a favor.
Yes. And as you're sharing that, I was thinking of all the ways in which women are described in the workplace when they bring issues forward. They're emotional, they're sensitive, all those kind of things that genderize an issue when it's actually just an issue. Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So it needs to be fair. The playing ground needs to be fair. And we cannot label people because of their gender or because how they react. We need to understand that if they come with an issue, as you said, it's a legitimate issue. And as a leader, your role and your responsibility is to get the facts and make judgment later.
Yes. Yeah. So this sounds pretty significant. I think thinking about my own, it's probably more self-doubt and, worry that I can't measure up to where I want to be going to sometimes. So less imposter syndrome. But if it was truly imposter syndrome, can we recover from it? Can we overcome it?
Luckily, we can. So as we said at the beginning, you are not born with it. This is not, the color of your eyes that you cannot change. It is just a set of beliefs. These are thought patterns that are automated in your brain. And so they run kind of like an operating system, right? So you can change that, you can disrupt them. And that is really, really good news. So how you can do it. The best way is to change the way you think about yourself. And this is the most effective one. And I know it sounds simplistic, but it really is the best way. So I can give you some techniques in a moment. Another way is to speak about it. Because as I said, imposter syndrome thrives in solitude because people are so ashamed of having these feelings and beliefs about themselves, right? But they would do almost anything rather than talk about it. But psychologists will advise that just opening up and talking about it and saying, I feel this way, is therapeutic, because 70% of population will have experienced this syndrome in their life at some point.
Oh, that's a lot.
That's a lot. That's a lot. So when 70% of people have experienced or will experience it, this is a known thought pattern for people. And they will usually say, oh yeah, I have felt this way. I know what you're talking about. And just by hearing this from other people, the person struggling with imposter syndrome will immediately feel like, whew, I'm not the only one.
Yes. Yeah. The shoulders
actually,
down. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's actually normal. Other people completely get it. It's not only me.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another way that you can treat the imposter syndrome, but there are many others. So for example, there's a strategy that was developed by a couple of psychologists. So Dr. Lisa and Richard, and I've written their name down, so I'm looking at it, Lisa and Richard Orby Austin. And I will be giving this resource also in the ebook that people can download at the end of this video. So they developed a technique called 3 C's. And those 3 C's are to clarify, to understand where your imposter syndrome came from, because it will always have an origin story. So you need to understand this. You need to understand your triggers, whether this is situation or thought, or maybe something that you hear, or something, or maybe unhealthy standard that you put for yourself, right? Or an ideal of performance that you hold. And then you change the narrative in your head. So as I said, you change the thoughts about yourself, but you can also change the language, how you speak about yourself. And they use a technique which I really love. It's called thickening the narrative. Because the imposter syndrome narrative is really simplistic. It's really black and white. It goes like this. I did this, so I am. I did this presentation poorly, so I am useless, right? I am stupid because I did this, or I said this, right? So it's really black or white. It's either or. It's either you're brilliant or you're dumb. So thickening the narrative is adding layers to it. And for example, saying, okay, this presentation really didn't go well, compared to 50 others that I did this year that were really brilliant. And this presentation didn't go well because the equipment failed, or because somebody switched the slides in the last minute. And next time I will check the equipment and I will make sure that nobody adds any slides to my presentation. Right? So this is this paraphrasing, the changing of the narrative in your own story, how you speak about yourself and how you think about yourself.
Powerful.
And then, yes, so then they have the next step, the next C, which is called to choose. And you choose to speak about your experience of imposter syndrome, as we just said. You share with people that you trust, not with the whole world, right? It's just with maybe your mentor, maybe with your loved ones, maybe with your friend, maybe with your coach, right? And you say, okay, this is how I'm feeling. This is really terrifying and it's paralyzing for me. And then hear back, oh yeah, I know what you're talking about. So then this choosing, speaking your truth, also includes speaking about your own achievements, because people with imposter syndrome find it very hard to own their own achievements, because remember, their bar is like, ooh, here. Yeah. So this technique teaches them to notice their achievements, no matter how small they are, to do it daily, to write a list, for example, and to celebrate in some way. It can be big things, it can be small things, it can be anything that you hold as an achievement, but you need to get that bar a little bit lower for that exercise, right? And so the last thing is to create. The last C is to create. And then what you create the support network. So for example, your coach, your mentor, somebody that you trust, your best friend, whoever you trust, that you can talk about these symptoms that you're experiencing, right? And so those 3 C's is the strategy that will help you slowly get out of that imposter syndrome feeling. And I would like to stress the word slowly because it's going to be a process, right? So as coaches, and I also listen to other therapists and psychologists, usually our experience is this, that the person experiencing the imposter syndrome would like to walk into a session feeling like an imposter and walk out of it not feeling like an imposter.
Sounds good. Can you do it?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I would like to be able to do that. But last time I checked, I went to Harvard, not Hogwarts, and I don't do magic,
I love it.
So, I can only give people the techniques, right? And these techniques, they work. Another technique is having control over ants. And ants are automatic negative thoughts. And there are different types of it. So we'll also list them in this ebook so that people can identify their ant patterns, because there are patterns usually. Let me just give you an example. Labeling. This is one pattern. So labeling is saying things like people are, or I am. Well, this presentation wasn't so great, so I am useless. I suck at presentations.
Yeah, we call those static evaluations in my world. They use the very, I forget the word now, but they're unchanging beliefs because they exist today, they existed yesterday, they'll exist tomorrow because it is as I am. Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So this, I call it labeling. You just put a label on yourself, like you wrote on your forehead saying, I'm dumb.
Yeah. Forever and ever, never going to change. Yes.
And speaking of ever and ever, this is also the language, the limiting language, as I call it, that we use. So something is never so-and-so. I will never be able to own this role. I will never succeed in A, B, or C. And I will always be less intelligent than my brother.
Yes.
Right? So these are those thought patterns that we call ants. And so you can do a lot with ants. You can, but first of all, it comes like every other change. It starts from awareness. You need to catch them. And ants, they're not easy to catch. So you will need to do some work for this. So again, take a piece of paper every day, journal, and say, okay, this is what I noticed in this situation, and see. And over time, you should see a pattern. You should see your type, your favorite type of ant that comes up. So, for example, some of my clients have the catastrophizing pattern, and it goes like this. Oh, this happened. This presentation wasn't good. Oh, wow. They are going to talk about this forever in my department. And because it was so bad, they are going to fire me. And then I will never find another work. And I will die alone, and the cat will eat my face.
Yes.
So we are laughing, and it's also good to laugh about this. But for these people, this is real. This is real, and this is painful, right? So, but if they catch this pattern, they can disrupt it in the moment when it happens. Okay, so first of all, it's like a detective work with this journaling and trying to find a pattern. But once you know that you have it, that this is your tendency, then in a moment you can say, wait a minute, I'm catastrophizing here. Maybe that's not such a good idea because it's also not realistic. Yeah. So you can disrupt those patterns, and you can just question them. Where is the data? Where is the evidence that they will fire me? Like, have they fired anybody else after one unsuccessful presentation that, by the way, wasn't so bad, because only 2 slides didn't work so well? Did they ever fire anybody in a situation like this? Where is my data? And question your own logic here.
Yeah, I absolutely love everything you just shared. And now I want to go back to those 3 C's because I wrote down a couple of them. I think I missed the first one to write down. I have choice and, well, maybe you just summarize them.
The first one is to clarify. The second one is to choose, to speak your own truth, right? And the last one is to create.
Yeah, and I was going to add one more to that, and that was being conscious. It's a conscious practice of being aware. So I just wanted to add that to there because I'm like, You did mention it's work. You're going to have to like be aware of this and practice this and capture these ants and squish them. Let's get rid of the ant problem.
And I know that you love your seeds. So yeah, absolutely. Put that fourth C there.
Yeah, I do love my seeds. Awesome. Well, this has been fascinating. And I think we could talk for a long time on this because it's certainly given me more information than I ever knew, to be honest, about imposter syndrome. I think I have been guilty of using it when I have just felt overwhelmed, challenged, unsure. And I've allowed those words to sit heavy, and kind of influence things. So is there anything you want to share before we wrap up our session here today?
So I think maybe we haven't talked about one of those coping mechanisms that people with imposter syndrome develop. And I think this is really important for people, especially for your audience to hear, because one of those mechanisms is perfectionism. And why perfectionism? Well, because again, of those really high standards that people with imposter syndrome put for themselves, right? So like nothing is ever good enough. They will literally, some of them, work themselves into burnout to create this perfect outcome. And there is no such thing as perfection. This is just a coping mechanism. I really want to stress that for everybody here to hear this. It is just a shield. Professor Brené Brown, she calls it a 20-ton shield that we drag with ourselves every day. And this creates such a friction, such an effort, such a resistance. So I think that there is a better way that we can treat the life energy that we have than to spend it on this useless chase of perfection, because there is no such a thing as perfection. And this is one of the most important things that people with imposter syndrome experience, the worst, I would say, the one that can drive them into burnout. So I wanted to caution people and also watch out for this. If you have those feelings that you feel that the only way that you can deserve that position, deserve that role, deserve that assignment is to work 10 hours, 15 hours a day, then please question that logic.
Yeah, that's the burnout. That's lots of risks, both for developing and for being in imposter syndrome that you've shared with us today, and some amazing strategies to help people identify it and to, as you said, remove the ants from our workplace.
Yes. And if I may add one more thing, speaking of overwork and burnout, this is where I see the role and responsibility for leaders, because again, there are many working environments that celebrate overwork. And this is nothing good. We drive our best people, because again, people who are high achievers experience burnout most often, but then we drive them through the organizational structure and the culture. We drive them into burnout. And so we might lose them. And so these environments will experience high turnover. And perhaps the leader should also take responsibility for supporting these people more as we start. This is what we started our interview. Instead of creating environments that drive them into destruction.
Yes. That definitely made me think of a friend I just had a conversation with the other day, and her boss said to her, if I call you at 2 a.m, I expect your phone to be at the bed. Like, I expect you to answer my call when I call you. And I was like, wow, talk about creating an environment where, she'll burn out, she'll leave. That's just a surefire way to get people to leave. Exactly. Right. But those healthy boundaries and the organization's responsibility to set those. Amazing.
Yeah.
Okay. No, go ahead, finish.
No, I just wanted to say that this is the aspect of dealing with imposter syndrome that practically nobody talks about, because as I said, we give the responsibility for dealing with it to the individual, when very often it is the organization or the environment around the individual that drives those feelings in the first place.
And I can see a high achiever almost succumbing to those unhealthy environments because they want to prove their worth. And so they may not even notice those warning signs. They may not even call out those warning signs. They just go, oh, I'm a high achiever. Let's do it. Bring it. And then, over time, start to notice that wear and tear.
Yeah, precisely.
Yeah. So you alluded to your ebook that you want to share. Would you like to talk a little bit more about that as we close off our session?
Sure. So, I've experienced imposter syndrome myself. I know how debilitating it is, and I really want to help people. So I've created this ebook where I put, first of all, I've tried to explain again what imposter syndrome is so that there's very high awareness what you're dealing with, because you need to know the demon that you're dealing with so that you can exercise it. And then, I also put resources for dealing with it. So those 3 C's that I talked about, those ends, dealing with perfectionism, dealing with procrastination. I put tips and strategies there in this ebook, and also the resources like books or videos that I find useful. And also there's this small bonus with 5 imposter syndrome types where people can, just for fun, but not only, identify themselves so that it's easier for them to deal with their own type of imposter syndrome.
That sounds fabulous. I'll be downloading it myself for sure.
And then give me feedback.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your insights on this very important topic with our audience today. It's been an absolute pleasure to host you.
Thank you so much, Tammy, again for inviting me, and for hosting this very important topic, because we could have talked about many other things, because there are so many other important things for leaders to know. But I think this one touches so many people, and I am really happy that we could discuss those tips and strategies, and also where it comes from, so that people really understand it and really can tackle it to the ground and overcome it.
Yes. It's just been so important. Such a valuable conversation. Thank you so much. And for those who are listening, don't forget your download is in the link right below. So make sure you catch that.
Thank you so much, Tammy.